Jessica felt a chill over her whole body when she heard the cry for help. She was just visiting the grave of her son, who had passed away under strange circumstances more than 2 years ago. She had visited nearly daily since then, but never had she heard anything like this here or anywhere else. Jessica could not believe whose voice she had heard calling out for help. Jessica was carefully headlined of the direction the cry for help had come from. She had no idea who or what to expect, but she could not simply ignore this. She knew that if her late son Mark had been in this situation, he would have helped. That was enough motivation for her. But what she had never expected was that this whole ordeal actually had a lot to do with Mark, and the cry for help had been for Jessica in particular to hear. When Jessica finally saw who the cry had come from, she nearly fell onto her knees in disbelief. She had never expected to see this person again. The person approached her and put a hand on Jessica's shoulder. "I'm going to explain everything to you, but who had been trying out for Jessica's help and why? And what did the mysterious death of her son Mark have to do with this? Before we start, can we get this video to 1,000 likes? Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel." Jessica knew that she'd never recover from losing Mark, the son she'd raised and loved for 2 whole decades. But there was one thing that surprised her. Jessica and her husband had tried to stay together after Mark's death, but it just wasn't working out. It felt like Jessica was a totally different person from who she used to be. Finally, it was time for them to make a difficult decision about the future of their marriage. After a while, Jessica's husband decided to file for divorce. She understood how he must have felt and wasn't angry with him about it. Jessica let her old job go. Without Mark around, she just couldn't put any effort into things like her job or her marriage. But there was one thing that still motivated her to get out of bed every day. Jessica made a daily ritual out of visiting Mark's grave. She tried to go the same time every day. Jessica convinced herself that visiting Mark every day was a healthy thing because it got her moving and out of bed. But it also meant that Jessica was constantly reminding herself of what she lost. So Jessica tried to adjust her ritual. Instead of crying by Mark's grave, Jessica tried to only focus on the good things. Jessica wanted to know everything there was to know about Mark's death. She thought that getting more information would bring her peace about everything. But there was only so much information available. The circumstances surrounding Mark's death had been so confusing that Jessica still didn't fully understand what had happened. He'd simply gone out one night and never come back. After Mark's disappearance, the police and a group of volunteers had searched the local forests for clues. In the end, when they found Mark, he had already passed away. But how? The police launched an investigation to make sure that Mark's death wasn't a homicide or related to a crime. But after their full investigation, they didn't have any evidence one way or the other. They had a few theories, but there was one that they settled on as the official answer. The police determined that Mark was responsible for taking his own life and that he hadn't been the victim of a crime or a homicide. Jessica was absolutely convinced that the police were wrong. She just knew that her son wouldn't have done such a thing. Jessica had noticed Mark acting distant and a little odd just before his death. His behavior had gone on for weeks, but he hadn't wanted to talk with her about it. As more time went on, Jessica started to see that there weren't any clear answers. She even began to accept the mystery of Mark's death to some extent. She had no idea that her ritual of going to visit Mark's grave every day would eventually lead her to a life-changing encounter. Jessica woke up on an otherwise ordinary day and got ready to go see Mark's grave. She liked to go early in the morning so that she wouldn't be interrupted by other funerals or visitors. Jessica reached Mark's grave and settled in to spend time with Mark. While she was thinking about everything she wished she could say to Mark, she suddenly heard a scream pierce the air. In the distance, she could hear that it was a woman's voice yelling for help. Jessica knew that she had to find out more. Was someone in danger? Jessica set out to investigate what was going on. She'd spent so much time in the cemetery without ever hearing someone in trouble. There were graves and trees in the way, so she had to take an unusual path to get there. When she was faced with a clump of bushes, she decided to cut in between them instead of taking the long way around. That choice would change everything. Before she could make it out the other side, she finally saw where the noise was coming from. Suddenly, she was thankful that she had the bushes to block her from being seen. Jessica was surprised to see that she was wrong. It didn't seem like someone was in trouble after all. In fact, the person screaming must have been part of the larger group standing around. Everyone was dressed in black, so Jessica assumed it was for a funeral. There was just one detail that didn't quite add up. It was unusually early for a funeral, and Jessica hadn't seen a procession go by while arriving at the cemetery. Plus, when she looked around the area, she didn't see an open grave or a casket waiting nearby. Jessica kept watching, hoping for some clue about what was going on. Jessica couldn't see the woman who had screamed earlier. She watched from the bushes to see if there were any more clues about what the group was doing. Jessica decided that she'd just ask the group if they needed anything, and then leave them in peace if they were okay. Maybe they knew more details about who had been screaming. But just before she stepped down from the bushes, she saw their faces and froze. It wasn't a funeral after all. The people dressed in black were all wearing masks that covered most of their faces. Now that she was paying more attention, Jessica realized that their black clothing wasn't appropriate for a funeral. Instead of suits or dresses, they were wearing clothes with hoods. But what were they doing in the cemetery? The people were obviously suspicious. At the same time, she didn't want to leave someone behind if they were in some kind of danger. There was a strong possibility that a woman was in danger, and Jessica wasn't going to abandon her just because she was afraid about what might happen. While she was deciding what to do, Jessica saw movement around a nearby mausoleum. The graveyard only had one large mausoleum. Jessica watched in horror as a woman dressed in white stepped out of it and approached the group. She was joined by two of the people dressed in black. If that wasn't unbelievable enough, Jessica almost gasped out loud when she saw the woman's face. Jessica couldn't believe that she recognized the woman. She hadn't seen her in ages, but she was positive that it was the same person. Jessica thought about calling the police and letting them handle the situation. Slowly, she removed her phone from her pocket. Jessica was so nervous about the strange group that she almost dropped her phone. When she went to unlock the screen, she accidentally hit the wrong button. She'd paused her music earlier, but the controls were still pulled up on her phone. Suddenly, her music started playing at full volume. As soon as the music started playing, the entire group turned around to stare at the bushes. There was no way for Jessica to deny that she'd been spying on them. Jessica was terrified that the group would attack her for spying on them. Jessica could barely breathe as panic overtook her. But after a minute had passed without anyone running at her, she started to relax. A few of the people removed their masks. They didn't look angry, but Jessica still didn't trust them. She kept her distance and stayed near the bushes. But then she noticed the woman in white. The woman in white stood up and approached Jessica. She was smiling, and it seemed like the woman was genuinely happy to see her. When the woman reached Jessica, she asked a question that Jessica didn't know how to answer. The woman wanted to know why Jessica had been watching them from the bushes. Jessica was afraid to say the wrong thing with the group watching them, but she told the truth about how she'd heard someone screaming for help and come over. She hoped that this was all just a huge misunderstanding. The woman seemed to understand immediately. She told Jessica that she had actually been screaming about hell, not calling for help. Jessica must have misheard from so far away. The woman pointed to the group behind her and started explaining what was going on. Jessica couldn't believe what she was hearing. The woman explained that they had gathered to perform a ritual to help spirits reach heaven. They met every month to do the same thing and hopefully save souls. Jessica was stunned to hear what they were doing. The woman in white had actually been one of Jessica's counselors. She helped Jessica cope while she was mourning her son. The woman was religious, and she'd spoken frequently about how she wanted to ensure that Jessica's son made it to heaven. But if that was her reason for being there, then who were the people in black? The woman in white explained that the others were all mourning the loss of a loved one. They wanted to participate in the ritual to guide those spirits to a better place. Not all of them were certain that the ceremony would work, but it gave them a sense of fulfillment and peace. The woman in white also had another motive for being there. As a counselor, the woman was committed to helping others. She loved being able to give people closure and watch them accept that their loved one had moved on. In her eyes, it was part of her calling to heal those around her. After hearing the woman's story, Jessica was surprised at how it changed her. After meeting the group, Jessica went back to where her son was buried to say goodbye. As she drove home, she felt herself give up some of the sadness that had been weighing her down. She thought about the woman in white and hoped that her son's spirit was among the group passing on to heaven.